The moment the bear cub tugged at his jacket, Private Michael Cooper knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary patrol. What happened next would challenge everything he thought he knew about wildlife survival and the thin line between instinct and protocol. Dawn painted the Montana sky in shades of amber and rose, casting long shadows through the towering pines of Glacier National Park. The crisp October air bit at Michael's cheeks as he adjusted the weight of his standard-issue rifle against his shoulder. 3 months into his border patrol assignment, the Chicago native still hadn't quite adjusted to the profound silence of these remote mountains. Back home, silence meant danger lurking in dark alleys. Here, in this vast wilderness, silence held different meanings, ones he was still learning to decipher. The crunch of fallen leaves beneath his boots echoed through the unusually still forest. No birdsong. No rustling in the underbrush. No distant calls of elk that typically accompanied his dawn patrols. Just an eerie calm that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Something felt off, and in his 24 years of life, the last 4 spent in military service, Michael had learned to trust that feeling. His commanding officer's words from yesterday's briefing echoed in his mind. Remember, Cooper. Increased wildlife activity this season. Bears preparing for hibernation. Keep your distance. Avoid interaction. Report any unusual behavior. Simple rules that had served him well until now. Michael checked his watch. 0600 hours. The sun had barely cleared the eastern peaks, and already the day felt different. The morning fog clung to the ground like phantom fingers, wrapping around ancient tree trunks and obscuring the forest floor. His fellow officers had initially laughed at his city background, a Chicago boy assigned to wilderness patrol. The irony wasn't lost on him. Everything he knew about wild animals came from training manuals and brief orientation sessions. Bears avoid humans. Wolves keep their distance. Mountain lions rarely show themselves. Nature follows predictable patterns. At least, that's what they taught him. Michael paused at his first checkpoint, reaching for his radio to make the routine morning report. Cooper checking in. Sector 7, all clear. No unusual. He stopped mid-sentence, his trained eyes catching movement in his periphery. Something was different about this movement, too deliberate for a deer, too careful for a moose. The fog parted slightly, revealing a sight that made his breath catch in his throat. 2 bear cubs, their dark brown fur glistening with morning dew, stepped into the clearing roughly 50 yards ahead. Michael's mind raced through his training protocols. Bear cubs meant a protective mother nearby. Every survival guide, every wildlife manual screamed at him to create distance. Yet, these cubs moved with strange purpose. Instead of the playful wobbling typical of young bears, their movements carried an urgency that sent chills down Michael's spine. The smaller cub, in particular, moved with an almost human-like deliberation, its dark eyes fixed intently on Michael's face. These weren't the random wanderings of lost cubs. They moved as if driven by something more profound than simple animal instinct. His hand instinctively tightened on his rifle as the cubs drew closer, now just 30 yards away. The larger cub paced back and forth, its movements becoming more agitated, more insistent. The smaller one suddenly sat back on its haunches and lifted its front paws in a gesture so startlingly human-like that Michael nearly dropped his weapon. The cub's behavior defied everything he had learned about wildlife. They showed no fear, no aggression. Instead, they exhibited something he never expected to see in wild animals: purpose. The smaller cub repeated its lifting gesture, looking directly at him, then turning its head back toward the direction they had come from. The larger one whimpered softly, a sound that carried notes of what could only be described as desperation. Michael's mind raced through his options. Standard procedure said to back away slowly. To never engage with wildlife, especially bear cubs. But these cubs were breaking every rule of wild animal behavior. They approached again, this time with soft sounds that seemed almost like pleading. The smaller one made that same lifting gesture, its eyes holding an expression that seemed impossible for a wild animal: fear, desperation, intelligence. The morning silence suddenly felt heavy with meaning. No birdsong, because the forest was holding its breath. No wildlife sounds, because something had disrupted the natural order. And now, these cubs, acting with such clear purpose, trying so hard to communicate with a human. Everything Michael knew about wildlife behavior told him to retreat. Everything his instincts told him about intelligence and desperation urged him to understand. Both cubs moved in perfect synchronization, taking steps forward, then looking back the way they came, then returning their gaze to him. Their movements formed a clear pattern. Follow us. The sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows through the trees. Michael checked his surroundings again, looking for signs of the mother bear. The cub's behavior suggested she wasn't nearby, which opened up even more unsettling questions. Young cubs never strayed far from their mother. Never approached humans. Never acted with such clear, intelligent purpose. Yet here they were, deliberately seeking human help, showing behaviors that shouldn't be possible. The smaller cub made another sound, unlike anything Michael had heard before. Not a growl. Not a typical bear vocalization. But something that could only be described as a plea. It echoed through the quiet forest, carrying such raw emotion that Michael felt it in his chest. As he stood frozen between protocol and compassion, the smaller cub did something that would forever change the course of that October morning. It reached forward and tugged at his jacket with its paw. Its eyes met his, with an intelligence that defied everything he thought he knew about the natural world. Through the crisp mountain air, the cub's desperate whimpers pierced the silence of the forest. Michael watched, transfixed, as they orchestrated a dance of communication that challenged everything he'd been taught about wildlife behavior. The smaller cub, its fur a shade lighter than its siblings, continued its extraordinary display, rising on its hind legs every few moments to gesture with surprising precision. His radio felt heavy on his belt, protocol demanding he report this unprecedented encounter. Yet something held him back. The same instinct that had kept him alive during his military training now told him this was beyond anything his superiors would understand or believe. The cubs moved with a synchronization that spoke of desperate purpose, their dark eyes never leaving his face as they performed their intricate ballet of plea and persuasion. The larger cub paced in tight circles, its movements becoming more agitated with each passing minute. Unlike the random wanderings of typical bear cubs, these motions formed a clear pattern. 3 steps forward. A pause to ensure Michael was watching. Then a deliberate turn toward the direction they had come from. The message was unmistakable. Time was running out for whatever they were trying to show him. "This is impossible," Michael muttered, his breath visible in the cool morning air. Everything in his training manual warned against this moment. Bears were supposed to be predictable. They either fled from humans or, in the case of mothers protecting cubs, showed aggression. These cubs displayed neither response. Instead, they exhibited a level of intelligence that sent chills down his spine. The smaller cub suddenly changed tactics, approaching even closer. At 15 feet away, close enough for Michael to see the intelligence burning in its eyes, it sat back and lifted both paws in that eerily human-like gesture. Its sibling positioned itself slightly behind, watching the forest behind them with nervous glances. They were making themselves vulnerable, breaking every rule of wild animal behavior. Michael's hand moved to his radio for the 4th time. And for the 4th time, he pulled it back. How could he possibly report this? 2 bear cubs attempting to communicate that human assistance was required? It sounded absurd even in his thoughts. The smaller cub's eyes followed his movement, showing an understanding of human gestures that should have been impossible. As if sensing his indecision, the cub rose again, this time turning completely around and taking several determined steps in the direction it had come from. It stopped, looked back at Michael with an expression that could only be described as pleading, then repeated the movement. The message was becoming more insistent. Time was clearly a factor in whatever drove these cubs to seek human help. The morning sun had risen higher, burning away the last wisps of fog that clung to the forest floor. Michael checked his watch again. Nearly 40 minutes had passed since this extraordinary encounter began. The cubs showed no signs of giving up, their dedication suggesting something of tremendous importance driving their actions. Wild animals, especially young bears, never maintain such prolonged contact with humans, yet these cubs seemed willing to break every rule of nature to get their message across. Their fur was ruffled in places, suggesting a difficult journey. Despite their purposeful movements, Michael could detect signs of exhaustion in their bearing. These cubs had been traveling for some time, driven by something urgent enough to override their natural fear of humans. The larger cub had begun making soft whimpering sounds, unlike anything Michael had heard in his training videos about bear behavior. The sound carried notes of urgency and distress that transcended species barriers. Years of training and protocols fought against the growing certainty in Michael's mind. Every manual, every guideline, every rule of wilderness interaction said to avoid following wildlife, especially bears. But these cubs had shattered every preconception about wild animal behavior. Their actions showed not just intelligence but reasoning, not just instinct but purpose. They weren't just moving randomly, they were trying to lead him somewhere. The smaller cub approached again, this time coming within arm's reach. It repeated its lifting gesture, eyes locked with Michael, conveying a message that transcended language. Behind it, its sibling paced with increasing agitation, glancing repeatedly in the direction they clearly needed to go. Their coordinated efforts spoke of an intelligence that defied conventional understanding of wildlife behavior. Michael felt the moment his resistance crumbled. These cubs had demonstrated more intelligence and determination than he had ever thought possible in wild animals. They had maintained their focused attempt at communication far longer than any natural behavior would explain. Whatever drove them to seek human help had to be significant. Taking a deep breath, he took one step in their direction. The reaction was immediate and astonishing. Both cubs perked up, their entire demeanor changing from desperation to what could only be described as hope. They moved forward with renewed energy, constantly looking back to ensure he was following. Their coordinated movements now had a clear purpose. They were guides, and they had finally convinced their chosen human to follow. As Michael took another step forward, officially breaking every protocol he'd been taught, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to become part of something extraordinary. The cubs moved ahead with practiced precision, maintaining a perfect distance, not too far that he would lose sight of them, not too close to make him uncomfortable. Their intelligence showed even in this careful balance, proving with each step that their behavior was far beyond simple animal instinct. The smaller cub looked back one more time, its eyes meeting Michael's with an expression that seemed to say, "Trust us." And in that moment, as the morning sun filtered through the canopy above, Michael realized he already did. The forest had grown denser as Michael followed his unusual guides deeper into unknown territory. Sunlight filtered through the thick canopy in broken shafts, creating a shifting tapestry of light and shadow on the forest floor. The cubs moved with surprising speed yet maintained that remarkable awareness of their human follower, never straying too far ahead, never letting him fall too far behind. Every few yards, they would pause in perfect synchronization, the smaller cub looking back with that same pleading gesture while its sibling scanned the path ahead. Only when they were sure Michael was still following would they continue their urgent journey. He checked his watch. They had been traveling for nearly 40 minutes, moving steadily uphill through increasingly rough terrain. The familiar trails had long disappeared. They were moving through untouched wilderness now, following a path that only the cubs seemed to know. Fallen logs and thick undergrowth made progress difficult, yet the cubs navigated each obstacle with practiced ease. They would wait patiently when Michael had to climb over massive tree trunks or push through dense brush, their eyes never leaving him, their anxiety growing more visible with each delay. His training screamed at him with each step, "Never follow wildlife. Never leave your patrol route. Never trust wild animals." Yet these cubs had shown such extraordinary behavior that normal rules seemed meaningless. They moved with purpose, communicated with intelligence, and displayed a level of trust in humans that defied everything he knew about wild animals. The morning had grown warm, and sweat trickled down Michael's back despite the cool mountain air. His rifle felt heavier with each step, a reminder of the protocols he was breaking. The cubs led him through a maze of towering pines, their path seemingly random but executed with too much precision to be anything but deliberate. A sudden change in the cubs' behavior sent Michael's heart racing. They had stopped at the edge of a small ravine, their bodies tense and alert. The larger cub turned completely around, facing Michael with an intensity that rooted him to the spot. Its sibling made that distinctive whimpering sound again, but this time, the noise carried notes of both warning and encouragement. The forest had grown eerily quiet again. No birds called. No small animals rustled in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The cubs' anxiety was palpable now. They paced back and forth at the ravine's edge, their movements becoming more urgent, more insistent. The smaller one stood on its hind legs, gesturing with increasing desperation. Michael tightened his grip on his rifle, not for protection from the cubs, but from the growing sense that something was very wrong in these woods. They had led him far from his patrol route, deep into territory he had never explored. Their behavior suggested they were approaching their destination, and their increasing agitation hinted at the urgency of the situation. Through the trees ahead, he caught glimpses of what appeared to be an unnatural clearing. The cubs' behavior changed again, they crouched lower to the ground, their movements becoming more cautious. Yet they still maintained that incredible awareness of Michael, ensuring he followed their lead. Their eyes held a mix of fear and determination that transcended any normal animal behavior. As they approached the clearing's edge, Michael detected unfamiliar scents on the breeze, metal, oil, and something else he couldn't quite identify. The cubs moved with even greater care now, leading him through dense undergrowth that provided cover while offering a view of what lay ahead. What he saw made his blood run cold. The clearing wasn't natural at all. Metal glinted in the morning sun, cages, traps, and what appeared to be vehicle tracks cutting through the earth. This was some kind of operation, hidden deep in the wilderness where no regular patrols would find it. The cubs pressed closer to the ground, their bodies trembling slightly as they guided Michael to a better vantage point. From their new position, he could see the full extent of what appeared to be a sophisticated poaching operation. Empty cages of various sizes lined one side of the clearing, while crude but effective snares were scattered throughout the area. The ground bore the scars of frequent vehicle traffic, and a makeshift shelter stood at the far end, partially concealed by camouflage netting. The cubs' extraordinary behavior suddenly made terrible sense. They hadn't just been seeking help, they had been leading him to evidence of a crime. Their intelligence went beyond mere animal instinct. They had somehow understood that this human activity was wrong and had sought out someone who could stop it. A sound from the cubs drew Michael's attention to the center of the clearing, and what he saw there made his heart stop. A large female bear, clearly the cub's mother, lay motionless but breathing, her massive body entangled in multiple snares. The traps had been cunningly engineered to capture without killing, suggesting this was no random poaching operation but something far more organized. The cubs' whimpers grew softer, more distressed, as they watched their mother from the safety of the undergrowth. They turned to Michael with expressions that seemed to plead, "Now you understand." Their incredible journey, their breaking of every natural instinct, their trust in a human, it had all been for this moment, this revelation. Michael reached for his radio, then froze as an engine sound echoed in the distance. The cubs tensed immediately, their behavior indicating they recognized the threat. Through the trees, he could see dust rising from what must be a concealed access road. Vehicles were approaching. The poachers were returning. Time was running out. The small family had placed their trust in him, defying every natural instinct to seek human help. Now that trust would be tested as Michael faced a decision that would change multiple lives forever. As he watched the cubs huddle closer together, their eyes never leaving their mother's form, he knew there was only one choice he could make. The forest held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The rumble of approaching vehicles grew louder as Michael crouched lower in the dense undergrowth. The cubs pressed against the ground beside him, their bodies trembling slightly, but their eyes remained fixed on their trapped mother. The morning sun now fully illuminated the clearing, revealing more disturbing details of the sophisticated poaching operation. From his concealed position, Michael could see into the makeshift shelter more clearly. Maps covered one wall, marked with dozens of red dots that represented trapping locations. This wasn't just one site, it was an entire network stretching across both sides of the border. Scattered papers and equipment suggested a professional operation that had been running for years. The mother bear stirred slightly, her dark fur matted with blood where the snares had cut into her flesh. The traps had been deliberately designed for live capture, a detail that made Michael's stomach turn. These weren't ordinary poachers looking for quick profits. They were wildlife traffickers, capturing animals alive for the exotic pet trade or worse. Two large trucks emerged from the concealed access road, their engines growling as they maneuvered into the clearing. 6 men climbed out, all heavily armed, moving with the precision of professionals who had done this many times before. They spoke in low voices, checking the perimeter before approaching the trapped bear. The cubs pressed closer to Michael, showing remarkable trust despite their obvious fear. The smaller one made that pleading gesture again but now stayed silent, seeming to understand the need for stealth. Their intelligence continued to amaze him. They weren't just seeking help, they were actively participating in their mother's rescue. Through the undergrowth, Michael could hear snippets of conversation. The men spoke multiple languages, switching between English, Russian, and something he didn't recognize. They discussed transport arrangements and buyer expectations, their casual tone suggesting this was routine business for them. "The Chinese buyer wants this one alive," one man said, approaching the mother bear with a tranquilizer gun. "Premium price for a breeding female." Moving carefully, Michael edged closer to the shelter, keeping to the shadows. The cubs followed his lead, their movements almost silent. Inside, he found more evidence of the operation's scale. Financial records showed transactions worth millions of dollars: bears, wolves, mountain lions, all captured alive and shipped to the highest bidders. A document caught his eye, an incident report from 6 months ago. The poachers had documented a problem with local forest guards who had discovered one of their sites and rescued several trapped animals. The report mentioned a female bear and cubs among those freed, noting with frustration how unusually calm the bears had remained around the rescue team. Everything suddenly clicked into place. The cubs remembered that rescue. They had experienced human kindness during that operation, watching as people freed them and their mother from similar traps. That experience had given them the extraordinary insight to seek human help again. Their intelligence went beyond mere instinct. They had observed, remembered, and reasoned their way through this crisis. The poachers' notes revealed more disturbing details. They had been tracking this bear family since the previous rescue, noting their unusual behavior patterns. The mother had been teaching her cubs to avoid the traps, showing them how to recognize human tools and equipment. The poachers had labeled her abnormally intelligent, a problem animal that needed to be removed because she was teaching other bears to avoid their traps. Michael's military training kicked in as he assessed the situation: 6 armed men, 2 vehicles, and an injured bear that would need careful handling during rescue. He reached for his radio, knowing his next actions would have to be precisely timed. The cubs watched him intently, seeming to understand that help was finally coming. More disturbing discoveries emerged from the shelter's documents. Shipping manifests showed regular deliveries to private collections worldwide, coordinated drop points, corrupted officials, a network that stretched across continents. The red dots on their map represented only the current sites. Old maps showed dozens more locations, suggesting hundreds of animals had already passed through their operation. The mother bear's eyes found Michael through the undergrowth, showing no fear despite her condition. Like her cubs, she displayed an unusual calmness around humans. Instead of aggression, her gaze held something that looked remarkably like trust, even as the poachers prepared their equipment around her. The cubs moved between their mother and Michael, their behavior now focused on showing him the snares that held her. Their intelligence in this moment was staggering. They not only understood the source of the problem but were actively showing him what needed to be fixed. The smaller cub pointed repeatedly at specific snares, displaying a level of comprehension that would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about animal intelligence. Michael's hand moved to his radio, but he froze at a new sound from the access road. More vehicles were arriving, reinforcements for the poaching team. The cubs tensed immediately, their behavior indicating they recognized the increased threat. Time was running out. The documents had revealed one more crucial detail: these men were part of a larger syndicate, and they wouldn't hesitate to use lethal force to protect their operation. Michael knew his next move would have to be perfect. The lives of this remarkable bear family and the future of countless other animals depended on what he did in the next few moments. As he prepared to make his move, the smaller cub touched his arm gently with its paw, its eyes meeting his with an expression of complete trust. In that moment, Michael understood that he wasn't just fighting to save one bear family. He was standing at the crossroads of something much larger, something that would challenge humanity's entire understanding of wildlife intelligence and the bonds possible between species. The forest held its breath as Michael reached for his radio one final time, knowing his next words would set in motion events that would change everything. A light breeze rustled through the trees as Michael pressed his radio's transmission button, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Base, this is Cooper. Code red at coordinates 48.7 degrees north, 113.8 degrees west. Suspected wildlife trafficking operation discovered. Request immediate backup and wildlife service support. Over." The response was immediate, crisp, and professional. "Copy that, Cooper. All units responding. Hold position and maintain surveillance. Over." The cubs remained perfectly still beside him, their behavior suggesting they understood the need for absolute silence. The poachers continued their preparations, unaware of the net that was about to close around them. Michael watched as they readied transport cages and prepared tranquilizer darts, his mind racing through tactical possibilities. Years of military training had taught him to analyze situations rapidly. 6 armed men in the clearing, 2 more arriving with the additional vehicles. The mother bear lay in the center, multiple snares restricting her movement. The poachers' vehicles were positioned for a quick exit. They had clearly done this before. 5 minutes out, crackled his radio, barely audible. Multiple units converging. Michael's attention shifted to the mother bear. Despite her injuries, she remained remarkably calm, her eyes moving between her cubs and the approaching poachers. The documents had described her as abnormally intelligent, and now he understood why. She wasn't just enduring her captivity, she was waiting, observing, processing everything around her with an intelligence that defied conventional understanding. A sudden commotion drew everyone's attention. One of the poachers had noticed signs of disturbance in the undergrowth where the cubs had led Michael. "Check the perimeter," he barked in heavily accented English. "Something's been through here recently." The cubs pressed closer to the ground, their bodies trembling slightly but maintaining perfect silence. The smaller one looked at Michael with those impossibly intelligent eyes, seeming to ask if they should move. He placed a gentle hand near them, signaling them to stay put. Their immediate understanding of his gesture added another layer to their extraordinary behavior. Boots crunched on leaves as 2 poachers approached their position. Michael calculated angles and distances, knowing he might have to act before backup arrived. The mother bear suddenly let out a low growl, not threatening, but loud enough to draw the poachers' attention back to her. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. The sound of distant vehicles reached them a moment before radio silence was broken. "All units in position. Moving on my mark." What happened next unfolded with military precision. Multiple vehicles burst into the clearing from different directions as officers emerged from the forest with weapons drawn. The poachers, caught completely off guard, barely had time to reach for their weapons before finding themselves surrounded. "Border Patrol. Drop your weapons. Hands where we can see them." The cubs watched intently as the scene unfolded, showing none of the fear wild animals should display during such chaos. Their focus remained on their mother, waiting for the moment they could reach her. The poachers, realizing they were thoroughly surrounded, began laying down their weapons. Wildlife service vehicles arrived moments later, their experienced team immediately assessing the mother bear's condition. The veterinarian in charge approached carefully, then stopped in surprise as the bear remained calm, watching him with that same intelligent gaze her cubs possessed. "I've never seen anything like this," the vet muttered as he began examining the snares. "She's completely aware of what we're doing. It's almost like she's cooperating." The cubs finally moved from their hiding place, approaching their mother with soft whimpers that carried notes of relief rather than distress. The wildlife service team stepped back in amazement as they watched the cubs gently touch their mother's face, their behavior showing a level of awareness and emotional intelligence that would challenge scientific understanding. As law enforcement officers began processing the scene, Michael provided a detailed report of everything he had discovered. The documents in the shelter revealed an operation far larger than anyone had suspected. The poaching ring had connections across multiple countries, dealing in rare and exotic animals for private collectors worldwide. The mother bear's rescue became a delicate operation. The snares had been designed to tighten if the animal struggled, but she remained remarkably still as the veterinary team worked to free her. The cubs stayed close, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to reassure their mother. Their coordinated behavior continued to astonish everyone present. "These bears have completely rewritten everything I thought I knew about wildlife behavior," the lead veterinarian commented as he treated the mother's wounds. "The way they sought human help, led you here, and are now facilitating their mother's rescue, it's unprecedented." The investigation team discovered more evidence with each passing moment: financial records, shipping manifests, customer lists. The operation had been making millions trafficking exotic species. The poachers' detailed notes about the bear family's unusual intelligence had inadvertently documented something else: the remarkable cognitive abilities of animals that humans had underestimated for too long. As the mother bear was finally freed from the last snare, she rose slowly, testing her injuries. The cubs pressed close to her sides, their family reunion witnessed by amazed officers and wildlife experts. Instead of immediately fleeing into the forest, the bears remained for a moment, their eyes finding Michael among the gathered humans. The smaller cub approached him one last time, rising briefly on its hind legs in that same gesture that had started this extraordinary morning, but this time the movement carried a different message, not a plea for help, but what could only be interpreted as gratitude. The mother bear's gaze met his, holding for a long moment that seemed to transcend the barriers between species. Then, with gentle nudges to her cubs, she led her family toward the forest. They paused at the tree line, looking back one final time before disappearing into the wilderness that was their home. As the morning's events transitioned into a major criminal investigation, Michael watched the spot where the bears had vanished, knowing he had been part of something that would change our understanding of wildlife forever. The bears had not only demonstrated remarkable intelligence and trust, but they had shown that the bonds between species could be deeper and more meaningful than anyone had imagined possible. The story of the remarkable bear family spread quickly through law enforcement and wildlife conservation circles, becoming a catalyst for change that would reshape our understanding of animal intelligence and human-wildlife relationships. In the weeks following the raid, the investigation revealed the full scope of the poaching operation. Over 300 animals had been trafficked internationally, generating millions in illegal profits. The discovery led to arrests across 12 countries and the dismantling of one of the largest wildlife trafficking networks in North America. Michael Cooper's report about the cubs' extraordinary behavior sparked intense interest in the scientific community. Wildlife researchers descended on the area, hoping to study the unprecedented level of intelligence displayed by the bear family. Their initial skepticism quickly turned to amazement as they documented similar behavior in other bears from the region. The mother bear, they discovered, had been systematically teaching other bears in the area to avoid human traps. Trail cameras captured footage of her demonstrating to younger bears how to recognize signs of human activity, how to detect hidden snares, and, most remarkably, how to distinguish between threatening and non-threatening human presences. She had created what researchers would later call a cultural transmission of knowledge within the local bear population. During his testimony at the traffickers' trial, Michael provided a detailed account of the cubs' remarkable behavior. They didn't just communicate, he explained to the spellbound courtroom. They reasoned. They remembered past experiences, made logical connections, and developed a plan that required sophisticated problem-solving abilities. They knew exactly who to approach and how to convey their need for help. The case became a turning point in wildlife protection legislation. Congress passed the Enhanced Wildlife Intelligence and Protection Act, which mandated more comprehensive studies of animal cognitive abilities and established stricter penalties for wildlife trafficking. The act specifically cited the bear family's case as evidence that animals possess far greater intelligence than previously acknowledged. 6 months after the rescue, Michael received a call that would bring his extraordinary experience full circle. Wildlife officials had been monitoring the bear family, observing as they returned to their natural patterns while maintaining their remarkable behaviors. The mother's wounds had healed completely, and she had resumed her role as what researchers now called a teacher bear, sharing her knowledge with others of her species. On a crisp spring morning, Michael returned to his patrol route, this time accompanied by a wildlife research team. As they approached the area where he had first encountered the cubs, movement in the underbrush caught their attention. The mother bear emerged, her cubs now noticeably larger but still showing that same extraordinary awareness that had amazed him months ago. Instead of retreating, the bear family maintained a respectful distance while clearly acknowledging the human presence. The researchers watched in amazement as the mother demonstrated behaviors never before documented in wild animals. She actively showed her cubs how to interact safely with humans, teaching them to recognize uniforms and distinguish between different human activities. What we're witnessing, the lead researcher explained, is nothing short of revolutionary. These bears have developed a sophisticated understanding of human behavior and are actively passing this knowledge to the next generation. It's forcing us to completely reevaluate our understanding of animal intelligence. The poaching raid had led to more than just criminal arrests. The discovered documents provided unprecedented insight into wildlife trafficking networks, leading to the creation of an international task force dedicated to protecting endangered species. Michael was offered a position as a liaison between Border Patrol and Wildlife Services, his unique experience making him invaluable in developing new protocols for human-wildlife interaction. The bear family's story became the subject of numerous scientific papers and sparked a global conversation about animal consciousness. Researchers documented similar instances of intelligent behavior in other species, suggesting that animals possess far greater cognitive abilities than humans had previously recognized. The case became required reading in wildlife management courses, changing how new generations of conservationists approached their work. Research teams studying the area's bear population made another remarkable discovery. The bears had developed a sophisticated system of communication using vocalizations and gestures that showed signs of what could only be described as cultural learning. The mother bear's teaching had created a community of animals that displayed unprecedented levels of intelligence and adaptation. On the anniversary of the rescue, Michael stood at his old patrol post, reflecting on how one extraordinary morning had changed so many lives. The forest had recovered from the poacher's presence, wildlife returning to their natural patterns, but something fundamental had shifted in how humans viewed their relationship with these remarkable creatures. The smaller cub's gesture, that human-like plea for help, had become symbolic of a deeper truth. That the boundaries between species were more fluid than anyone had imagined. The bear family had demonstrated that intelligence, empathy, and the capacity for trust transcended the barriers humans had constructed between themselves and the natural world. As if to emphasize this point, movement in the undergrowth revealed the bear family once again. They had grown but remained unmistakable. The cubs, nearly grown now, showed the same remarkable awareness that had amazed him a year ago. Their mother, fully healed and confident, watched as her offspring demonstrated their learned behaviors to younger bears, continuing the cycle of knowledge transmission that made this population unique. The mother bear's gaze met Michael's one final time, holding that same intelligence that had challenged everything he thought he knew about wildlife. In that moment, he understood that his experience hadn't just changed procedures or sparked new research. It had revealed a fundamental truth about the capacity for understanding between species. As the bears disappeared back into their forest home, Michael knew that their legacy would continue to shape human understanding of wildlife for generations to come. The extraordinary morning when two bear cubs defied every natural instinct to seek human help had become more than just an amazing story. It had opened humanity's eyes to the remarkable intelligence that had always existed in the natural world, waiting to be recognized and understood. The forest around him seemed different now, not just a wilderness to be patrolled, but a complex community of intelligent beings, each with their own capacity for reasoning, learning, and trust. The line between human and animal intelligence had been redrawn, and in that redrawing lay the hope for a deeper, more meaningful relationship between species.